All right, so we will get started. We've gone through attendance, so we'll move on to the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the March 25th, 2020 and April 1st, 2020 meetings as presented, barring any errors or omissions. I have a motion from Valley and a second from Susannah. And we will go through the roll call in order to vote on the motion for the minutes. Kate.
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Kandi.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes, sorry.
Susannah.
Yes.
Beth.
Yes.
Mara.
Yes.
I vote yes. Valley.
Yes.
Maddie.
Yes.
And Liam.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, adjustments to the agenda. Becky?
Yes, I'd like to move item 12, the discussion of the budget, before the policy discussion.
Okay. Item 6, good news and recognition. Report from our board student rep. Liam, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I've got a few things. I mean, nothing big, but so the AP exams are coming up fast, and we will be taking them from May 11th to the 22nd. And the exams have kind of been changed around a lot this year, and they will be taken at home. I don't know if you knew that or not, but the SAT has also been postponed till August 24th. Any prior exams have been canceled. Then there's a bit more localized news, I guess, like the independent projects for the underclassmen and juniors that are coming up. And these are basically projects that will start June 1st and run until the end of the year. And there isn't too much information about them yet, but basically they will allow you to research a topic that you find interesting and then learn about the subject for about 3 weeks until the end of school. And then Freeport High School is offering online math support from 8:30 to 11:30 p.m. Oh, a.m., my bad, and 12 to 3 p.m. Also, senior projects are starting next Monday, which will be pretty interesting and exciting, I think, for everyone who's doing those. And Freeport High School has also been sending out many online opportunities for internships, competitions, and other learning opportunities to the students. And I don't have much else to say right now. So far, I think everything's going pretty great considering the circumstances. So.
Great, thank you, Liam. Okay, so this is our first public comment period in the agenda. So we just ask that if you would like to speak, you raise your hand and we'll call on folks in the order that the hands are raised. And once we call on you, if you could just give us your name, where you're from, and keep your comments to 3 minutes, that would be much appreciated. Okay, so we're not seeing any hands raised, but if we have anybody who is on the phone and doesn't have that ability, if you wanted to just unmute yourself and just give us your name and your comments, you could do that at this time. All right. We will move on. Report from the superintendent.
Thank you. So spring is finally here and our remote learning continues. With the latest update from the governor, remote learning will continue for the remainder of this year, which is June the 19th for us. And you'll hear more details tonight about how our remote learning is going from Assistant Superintendent Alexander and Principals Fitton, Grogan, and Gulko. So you have that to look forward to. With all of the changes occurring because of the COVID virus, I've been trying to send out frequent communications to families and staff. Today, the Cumberland County Superintendents met remotely with Commissioner Macon, and she informed us that the CARES Act application should be coming out within a week for us to apply for those funds, which today we were told again would count. We would receive approximately 80% of our Title I funds, which we estimate to be about $139,000. They tell us that the application is really simple, only 20 minutes. So I've asked Cynthia to put the timer on and see how much time it really is going to take her to complete it. But we're hopeful about that. And that money can be used for any cost that we have had because of the virus, or for typical projects covered under Title I, like a summer school. We also were told that our subsidy amounts today should remain intact, that they're going to fight hard not to have any reductions in that. As you know, throughout the state, revenues are going to be down, but she really told us she thought we could count on that money. There was also a lot of discussion today about graduation, and that under the current guidelines that the governor came out with yesterday, that we're not going to be able to hold the traditional graduation that we were hoping to hold in August. So we're going to have to go back to the drawing board with our seniors and with Principal Gulko, and just get really creative and try to find a way to celebrate our seniors in a way that's not going to look like it did in the past. We're also told that there is legislation that the governor is now reviewing around the annual budget meeting. We did not get any hint of what that's going to look like, but because of the current guidelines, I really feel like our annual budget meeting that we had scheduled in June, we're not going to be able to hold it in the traditional way. So stay tuned on that point. Our finance director is currently out on leave, and until she returns, Scott Batonis, who's with us tonight, has agreed to help us out as we kind of navigate the end of the year finances. He only began on Thursday, so don't give him too many hard questions tonight. And we are prioritizing the to-do list for him. And one item I've asked him to look into is the projected year-end savings. I know we're all very interested in that, but he didn't build this budget, and being just on the job for less than a week, we're really not ready to make a prediction on that savings tonight, but we will have that estimated number, we hope, by the May 13th meeting. We also are hopeful at that May 13th meeting that Dennis will be presenting the facilities update that he's been working on for, I don't know, a couple of months now. And he also has been working with two companies, Train and Mechanical Service, to provide us with an estimate of what an energy audit would look like and cost. And I think Kate will report out on that when we hear from the Finance Committee tonight. And then also the solar agreement that you asked me to go forward with is currently being reviewed by our lawyers. I'm speaking to them tomorrow, so I'm hopeful that you will see that on the May 13th meeting also. The budget brochure was recently mailed to every household in the district. And as you know, since we published that, we have revised a budget timeline, so you can't count on those dates that you see in your brochure. But I do want to remind everyone that our budget validation referendum vote is July 14th. I do believe that will occur. I feel like that's a firm date. And I would say this might be a good year to request an absentee ballot. I've already requested mine, so you might want to think about that rather than waiting in those lines. And then, we do hope to hear something about our annual budget meeting and what that will be within the next couple of weeks. I have 4 resignations to report tonight. Faith Farrington, Durham Community School Special Education Teacher. Stephanie Weeks, Freeport Middle School Health Teacher. Amy Chaput, Moore Street School Kindergarten Teacher. And Martha Pulsifer, Pownell Elementary School First Grade Teacher. And I just really want to end my report by continuing to thank our staff for all of their hard work. Since March 16th, it's been a heavy lift. And I also want to thank our parents for supporting their children in remote learning, because without them, we couldn't really do the remote learning. And lastly, you know, my hat's off to our students who have shown that they truly are resilient during times like this. It's just a very kind of confusing and ever-changing world at the moment. And I just want to thank everyone, including the board, for their efforts in getting us through this time. I know it hasn't been easy. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. The only administrator report we have this evening is finance. 6 days in, are you going to provide that to us, Scott? I think you're still muted. There you go.
So I am here, just been here for about 6 days. On the website a couple of days ago was posted the March 31st expenses for 11 articles. I looked back at March 31st for the previous year, and based on percentages spent, we're almost the exact same percentage spent. It's a good place. It's been, it was around 66% of the budget is spent. The year, if you look at this, there's been 19 payrolls, is 73% spent. So the budget right now is well below the payrolls. The place to be. Some of that gets caught up in the last couple of payrolls with vacation time that may be owed, or execs that have taken 26 pays this year. But I think that the budget is in a good place right now.
All right, we're gonna. Anybody have any questions for Scott? All right, we'll let you off easy this time, Scott.
Thank you.
All right, board comments and committee reports. So first on there is our board information exchange and agenda requests. So if we have any board members who had something they wanted to share about a subcommittee they were on, or an agenda request, Jeannie's going to tell, is it just Maura?
Oh, Maura.
Okay. She popped up to the top of mine, so maybe mine's working now where I can see whose hand goes up first. Maura.
Hi there. So Region 10 had our first meeting since the pandemic started on Monday night, and we approved the budget for this year or for next year, and also did decide to suspend the math program, which I had mentioned to folks before, and got an update on how remote learning is going for students in Region 10. And that's it.
Okay. I guess my question for you, Maura, would be on the budget. Was it in line with what we had planned for in our budget?
Yep, it was exactly the same. Well, nothing was changed.
Great, thank you. Any other? Nope. Okay. So we will jump to Finance Committee. Kate.
Okay. I'm going to report out on our last finance meeting, which was on April 8th. And at that meeting, we went through a few things. We reviewed the budget motions that we're going to have to vote on at our board meeting, but we also went through the budget warrants, which are those papers that we all have to sign that get posted. And then that's what we also vote on at the annual town meeting, annual budget meeting. that's the piece that we're really scrutinizing this year, because that's where the error was made last year in the warrant number article, that we under authorized ourselves to raise money. So we also reviewed that again today at today's finance meeting, and we're going to be, we just had a few more questions, legal questions about where, everything's balancing. We think we've got the numbers pretty straight, but we just want to make sure that we're putting them in the right buckets legally, because as you all know, we have some unique parts of our cost sharing formula and our RPC agreement that don't match up identically with the state law. So we want to make sure legally we've got the money in the right places. The other thing that we reviewed at that meeting was the budget timeline. As you all know, we're moving the referendum out to July 14th. So we went through that process of backing into the last possible day that we need to have our signatures on all the warrants and the budget warrants passed at our meeting. So that's going to put us at the end of, we have until the end of May, I think it's like the 27th, to make sure that we got everything buttoned up with the warrants. And what else did we do? We talked about the cost sharing next steps. So at our last board meeting, I think it was our last board meeting, it's been a long time. The board instructed Becky and Ann to reach out to the contractor to be working on the contract, the cost sharing formula. So we just talked about the next steps there, and Dr. Foley was going to contact one of the top prospects and interview him in May, hopefully. We also talked about new positions that we were looking to add in this upcoming budget year, and whether or not we could look at hiring some of those positions, even though we won't have the budget approved by voters until the middle of July, but our fiscal year starts July 1st. And Dr. Foley was wondering whether or not she could do those hires, and we just had a few additional questions for her that she was going to look into before we move forward with doing that. Has to do with how, if we were to hire them, how would we fund them? Because basically what happens when you don't approve your budget by July 1st, you're rolling forward with the budget we're in now. It's going to be the same. And we were concerned about how the current budget would be impacted by some of the increase in steps for teachers. So we want to make sure we have enough money to bring on additional positions if we were to have to stick with the current budget dollar amount. What else? I think that's it on that part. Dr. Foley wanted me to cover this meeting that we just had, the finance meeting that we had before this board meeting. We did review the proposals that Dennis had gotten for the energy audits. We had two proposals, one from Mechanical Services and one from Train. Train's was almost about $30,000. It was fee-based, but that fee would be waived if we were to contract with them for like a performance contract. And then Mechanical Services, they're donating their services for the energy audit. They're a local company. The president of the company lives in Freeport, wants to be supportive of RSU 5's efforts in becoming more sustainable with our energy. And so they wanted to be part of that. So they're willing to donate those services, and that's not contingent on any future contracted services with them. So we, as the Finance Committee, recommended we move forward with Mechanical Services. The think that's it for my report.
Any questions for Kate? Okay. Strategic communications. Migration of students. Is this you, Kandi?
Yes. The Strategic Communication Committee has not met since January, so there's not a whole lot to report. We'll be meeting again May 15th. And as Becky mentioned in her report, communication with families and doing the newspaper thing and whatnot and the budget brochure, communication has all gone forward. But you'll see the kind of lime green, whatever color in your folder is an annual report that you get about the migration of students. And you can see that it happens in October. And we had a migration this year of 396 students. And the one place where we had more than the previous year, other than one or two, was there are more students being homeschooled now than previously. So that's a report for you, but that's about it from the Strategic Communication Committee since we haven't met.
Thank you, Kandi. Any questions for Kandi? Okay. Moving on to policy. Still Kandi.
Yes. As you can see from the orangey paper in your packet, the long list of policies, and Cynthia tells us that our meetings in May and June are going to have a long list of policies to work on too. You can see some of them were reviewed with no changes, and some are coming back, were revised and coming back to you, some for first, some for second read. The one that we put some off until our May meeting, and just the one I would mention is those that have been put off is BEB, board members' use of social media. We've never had a policy on this before, but there will be one, and it will come to you. We'll be working on a brand new policy. That's about it.
Okay. Any questions for Kandi on policy? And just a quick reminder that Becky moved our 11 policy review to after our budget discussion. So we'll hop back to that in a bit, but we're going to jump to 12, unfinished business, budget timeline.
I think I really covered this in my superintendent update, because now, since we printed this and what we know from the governor, I don't know, that May 27th, I think that's when we're still wanting to get our warrant signed by. But that annual budget meeting on June 17th is subject to change. The budget validation referendum vote, we feel good about July 14th. And then we'll have the additional board meeting to vote and sign the computation and declaration of votes the following day on July 15th. So that is an additional board meeting that you probably weren't counting on. So you might want to just put that on your calendar. And that's it.
Okay. So 12B, discussion of the adopted budget. I think we've heard some feedback, both from the board emails, as well as I know I have had several folks reach out to me about whether our board was interested or was planning to review the budget that we adopted on April 1st, given the current status of the economy, economics, impact on employment in the state, potential revenue shortfalls from the state level, which it sounds like are not expected to be put our subsidy for 2021 in jeopardy, but there's definitely the sense that it's going to put pressure on next year's funding for 21-22. So just keeping, being thoughtful in how we created a budget. Certainly I think we presented a budget that met the needs of our students. It was fiscally responsible. But, I do think it's worth a discussion as a board of, are we still comfortable with the budget we presented in terms of increases relative to, 1 in 7 Maine employees filing for unemployment in the last 45 days. We just thought we would put it out there to board members to have a discussion and see where it took us. So. Valley.
Hi, thank you for bringing this up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So where I stand, I recognize that we're in really difficult times. I mean, anyone who owns a business that has anything to do with the service sector knows that there is no income flowing into any homes. Having said that, the needs that our students will have next year are compounded by two things. One, that they will need more help from us on the financial side with nutrition and mental health services, all those things. In addition to that, we are falling fast behind in the academic mission that we have set up for ourselves for obvious reasons. We're all trying the best we can. Teachers are doing a fantastic job. Administrators are killing themselves. But the reality is that our students are not learning nearly as much as they would have if they had been in the classroom. So I have no appetite whatsoever to cut services to students, no cuts in staffing, including the staffing that we proposed in the budget added to service the increasing enrollments that we have for next year. And the same goes to mental health and nutrition. I think academic, mental health, and nutrition are 3 areas where I really wouldn't feel comfortable compromising. However, I would be willing to entertain asking the CA, the support staff, and administrators, either voluntarily, they would agree to a 1% reduction in the increase in their salaries for next year.
Come again?
Michelle?
Oh, Kandi. Yeah, I saw you waving before. So Kandi, just to make sure, just in case you're not on my screen when you're waving, do you know
Okay.
how to do the little raise hand thing on your screen?
Oh, yeah, I guess I do somewhere here.
No, you don't have to do it now because go ahead.
Okay.
I saw you waving at me, but just next time so we don't miss you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I talked to Michelle and Becky about this a week or more ago, and I certainly agree that we want to make sure that any reductions that we're not hurting programming for students. But given these times, and I think it's very important that we look at whether it's possible to reduce the percentage on the increase and the impact for taxes on the community. And there are obviously things we can look at, money we're not spending this year, that kind of thing. So that we need to get that kind of information when we can. But I just wanted to say that I feel very, very strongly for supporting the families out there who are having a tough time. And given the history of particularly Durham and Pownell not supporting the budget, I think that we would be well respected if we looked at what we could do to reduce the increase, and to make sure that, if we do that, to let newspapers and other folks know that, so that the word gets out there to the communities that we're looking at that.
Thank you, Kandi. Susannah.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what both Vali and Kandi were just saying about both focusing on the support or the importance of services. and nutrition being a big one, the mental health big one, and that the school is really supporting students, but also balancing that with needing the support of the community. And so looking at ways in which, whether, to reduce the burden on the community and people who are not comfortable with the tax increase, with paying that, not having the income, because that's certainly, I think, an issue for many people right now. And so figuring out where we can, what money isn't being used, whether we can reallocate something, and just want to keep that open for consideration. So.
Lindsay.
I think they've all said it ahead of me. I agree with all of them. I've been really concerned about this. I did not write directly to you guys, but it's when I saw it on the budget, on the agenda, I was relieved. I think we are also going to walk a tight line, just like the governor of every state right now, which is balancing health versus economic disaster. And we have to balance school with respecting our community members. We had an email come to the board from a gentleman saying that when we passed the budget, it was a different time. And I thought that was a brilliant statement, because it was. We didn't know how far we were going to free fall and are going to continue to free fall. That said, I completely agree with what Vali is saying. Our children are going to need, nutrition's not going to go down. Mental health is going to go up because this is trauma. So we have a really tight line to balance. I am wondering, and it might have already been covered because this is not my area of fluency at all. I know we are realizing cost savings by being closed right now, and I can't remember, can that be applied? Or there, I feel like there was some stipulation. Finally, also what Vali said, most people are taking some form of a pay cut right now. Nobody's seeing a raise. As difficult as that is to say, I think that is the reality we're living in. So I think I've said what I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Kate.
I agree. I think that one piece that I'm mostly concerned about, and I know that we're getting the message that our state subsidy should probably remain intact for next year. I don't have confidence in that, because once the state legislature has to be called back in this summer at some point, probably someday, they're going to have to make some really tough decisions to close that budget shortfall that they're looking at having in this upcoming fiscal year. And so I just see them having to pass some sort of supplemental budget, and us having to mid-year cut, which we've had to do when we've gotten the message mid-year that we're not going to be getting as much subsidy as we thought we were going to get. And so I want to make sure that we anticipate that possibility and figure out how we can not have to switch gears like that in the middle of the next school year, so that we're going in lean, knowing it's going to be tough. And the tricky thing here is that if we maintain our assumption on the subsidy amount, then we still, we're probably undercharging the taxpayers. So there's two compounding issues where you have to accommodate the cut that you think you might have in state subsidy, and then also see how you can then also reduce the impact to the taxpayer at the same time. That's a double whammy. So if we were just to try to reduce the tax impact and assume our state subsidy remains the same, then that's a smaller dollar amount than if we assume the state subsidy goes down and we send a smaller tax bill to our towns. So I don't know how we move forward in that estimate, but I'd like if we come out of this instructing administrators to go back with Becky and come up with proposals, I would like them to consider cost reduction, or I guess revenue reductions from both state subsidy and local taxation.
Okay. No other hands up? Oh, Valley.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure that I would want as far as try to guess if we're going to lose the subsidy or how much. I would rather just have a hefty undesignated fund balance or contingency amount so that we can basically call on that to address any cuts that we may have in state subsidy. But at this point, I'm not really hearing from anyone that this is imminent for this year, but it is definitely for the following 2 years. So I would rather just address that when it comes, not by going super lean into this year, not obviously have any extra padding because no one can afford that this year. But I wouldn't just cut a lot of it, what we have in the budget that is all absolutely necessary just in case. But I do want to look into the unexpended money that the towns have held for us to mitigate the tax impact, the money that we did not collect based on that warrant error last year. I know for a fact that Freeport at least has committed to returning that to the taxpayer, specifically to mitigate the impact of the school tax. So I want to see that number factored in so that we can reflect the actual impact to the taxpayer and try not to speak solely about the increase in the budget, which is what people focus on, but try to communicate a little more aggressively what the actual tax increase will be for each resident in each of the towns, which is lower than the actual increase to the budget.
Susannah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I was earlier wondering about the undesignated funds and just wondering if you can clarify what the rules around that and whether how we can tap into those, what sources of funding are there that we can tap into, such as the undesignated funds, and then the money that the towns have that Valley was just talking about as well, what's available, what's not available. Thank you.
So the undesignated fund balance, as you guys recall from our school finance 101 back earlier in the year, we were all talking about this for cost sharing purposes, is essentially the savings account for the district, right? So it's savings that have been realized over the course of years. We've used those funds to offset taxation in some level. Every year I've been on the board, it varies year to year what we allocate. We were trying to move towards having a more accurate budget with not a lot of excess moving to undesignated fund balance. So really budgeting on actual performance from prior years, so that we weren't really collecting more than we needed from the taxpayers. And by doing that, and also using those funds for projects like the track and field and other things like that, we had gotten our undesignated fund balance to about 3% of our budget, which is what the state recommends. The issue with the warrants that occurred last year reduced that million down to 650,000. Which is where our audited undesignated fund balance is as of June 30th of 2019. So our last audit from the accountants. So we have the ability to use that savings account, if you will, to offset how much we need to collect from the towns in order to fund the budget that we approve. So the adopted budget that we approved on April 1st included the use of $160,000 of undesignated fund balance. How we came up with that number was the initial estimate for the savings from being closed for that first chunk of time, if you will, between March 16th through April vacation. So that was Ann's estimate for our savings from transportation and all of those other items that we didn't need to incur because the schools were closed with the remote learning plan. So we currently in our budget have $160,000 allocated to undesignated fund balance. With the closure of the schools through the remainder of the school year in June, that 160 in savings will be higher than that. We don't know what that number is yet. That is one of the tasks that Becky has asked Scott to tackle in the next few weeks. And so that's the number we're hoping to have for the board on May 13th. Is an estimate of what those year-end savings are. Now, every year there is amount of savings that we have, right? We generally are running below how much we approve, but we're trying to make that amount smaller and smaller every year to really be budgeting more accurately. So historically, it hasn't been as critical of a discussion point because we weren't in the economic situation we are in today. So I think Lindsay asked it earlier and Susannah right there, could we use more of our undesignated fund balance to offset taxation for next year? Knowing that some of that would likely get reimbursed with additional savings from this year to go back into that savings account, right? So what we don't spend this year would increase our undesignated fund balance next year on the audit. Becky was very adamant, and I don't disagree with her that, we wouldn't want to be looking at certainly nothing bigger than our audited unexpended fund balance, right? We have 650 in there now. We shouldn't be assuming we're going to have a whole bunch more than that and putting it all towards next year. What did we decide we're calling it? Funny money. Until it's audited by the accountants, it's not, we shouldn't be planning on spending it yet. But we do have additional funds. Right now, after the 160, we've already allocated, there's still $500,000 in that undesignated fund balance. That is a source of funds, if you will. But we just want to be careful in that that would also be sort of a cushion of if the state were to reduce funding, we might have to access those funds in order to maintain our program levels. Because, we have a budget that's approved up to a certain number of dollars. We can only collect taxes for this much. The rest comes from the state and from that undesignated fund balance. So, we wouldn't want to double hit that and plan on that if the subsidy went down, but then we also use it on the front end. And I guess my thought on it is we also want to be careful that I do think I'm hopeful that the 2021 subsidy will maintain what they've provided to us, but I have much less confidence that the following year or 2 years are going to be at the level that we're seeing right now. I think they're going to shift some of that back to the towns because they're going to have to. The revenues just aren't going to be there from the state level. So I think, does that answer the question on undesignated fund balance and how we can use it? Okay. Kate.
I don't I kind of like Valley's idea, like we could cushion our contingency fund a little bit more. I'm not suggesting like we assume that our subsidy will go down a certain amount. I want us to plan that it could go down, and cushioning the contingency line is one way to accommodate that, but by doing that, I guess what my point was, when you do that, you're driving up the local taxes. So you're trying to balance two things. I just am asking for us to consider that there could be that double whammy, and that if you're trying to lower the local tax impact without having to cut things, you got to think, what would happen if mid-year the state subsidy gets cut too? Where would we get that extra funding? Contingency is one way to do it.
And one quick reminder, the amount that we've sort of rolled as our contingency number for the last several years has been that $176,000. And I don't think, as long as Dr. Foley's been here, we've ever actually had to access any of those funds. I think we've been able to live within the budget in other ways. And we've always rolled that back as a revenue source for the upcoming year. So it's in our budget as a placeholder. When we don't use it, we don't collect it again the next year. We give it back as you know, an offset to the budget. So that's the amount that we have currently in our contingency line item. Jen.
Okay. I don't know if we have the time to do this, because I'm confused a tiny bit about the times. But anyway, you know, I know one of the things that we've always appreciated during budget season is how kind of seamless and easy Becky and the administration sort of prepares that list, like a tiered list with different options. And I feel like if we have time for that, if we could kind of do that going backwards and looking at it as kind of taking things out. And I don't think it necessarily has to be all things that were put into the budget this year. I mean, being very creative at looking at kind of the big picture and where there's maybe other places to save money, and just give the board a little bit, you know, we can give direction as to things that we are just not willing to cut. You know, kind of going back to what, I think Vali said at the beginning, you know, the mental health issues and the nutrition, things like that. But come up with sort of some, you know, a tiered system of things that we could remove that would save money. And, you know, it could be presented sort of the same way that the budget is presented to us, but kind of going the other way of taking things out.
Kate.
Yeah, I'm not against that either. I think it's really up to how the administrators want to approach it. Valley's idea certainly is like the easiest way to do it without kind of nibbling around the edges and impacting students, is asking, because that is our biggest increase is raises. And so, I mean, that's the big, like, easy one to target. There probably are some other maybe low-hanging fruit, but won't be as impactful. But I'm willing to entertain any of the options that administrators could bring back to us.
Becky.
Would be happy to do that kind of tiered system that we've done before, and use our creative thinking, and then you can kind of cherry pick from there, I guess you'd say. I think what we really need is a number you're looking for, or percent. I don't want to, you know, that would be very helpful to us to know, you know, how deep you're wanting us to go.
And I guess to that front, one of the things that Valley had mentioned earlier was the funds that went back to the 3 towns, about $350,000. I ran the impacts assuming the 3 towns use those offsets to offset the school budget this year. I know Freeport and Durham have both said that is their intention. I don't think we've heard one way or the other from Pownell on their plans with it. But if we presume they did, what the tax impact for Durham, Freeport, and Pownell would be based on the current budget that we adopted on April 1st. For Durham would be an increase of 1.56. For Freeport would be an increase of 2.28. And for Pownell would be an increase of 1.46. So that's what we're looking at in terms of tax impact relative to the current budget. Remember, that assumes $160,000 of undesignated fund balance and those returned assessments used to offset the budget. Thing to keep in mind is that those are obviously a one-time adjustment for that returned assessment. So if that's helpful for the discussion of, can we provide Becky and her team with what are we looking for? What do we think is a reasonable ask of our communities in a time like this? Valley.
Yeah, thank you for running those numbers. These are the numbers that we hope we can, or at least personally, I hope that we can communicate very clearly. But going back to the discussion about the tiered cuts, mental health and nutrition definitely up there in my list of do not touch, but also teaching staff. Class sizes, these teachers are going to be burdened with a lot more teaching next year than they would have been normally. So I really do not feel comfortable entertaining cuts to teaching staff either. Thank you.
Kate.
Do you know, Dr. Foley, whether any other school districts are looking at approaching their teachers union and support staff unions to request or see if they would entertain a temporary reduction in increase?
That is one topic we haven't discussed. So I think a lot of districts are not as far along as we are. Our budget, it gets adopted a lot earlier. And so I think a lot of them are looking at cuts, but I don't know that we have not talked about whether they're approaching their staffs. So that's something, I think our next meeting, Cynthia, is Wednesday. And so I'm happy to put that out there because I think it would be important information to know because I think if we're the only one, it kind of sends some type of message. And I'm not sure that we would want to be the only one doing that. And I think I'm going to go back to asking the board to give me kind of a number and then letting our administrative team that I think knows our schools and what we're up against to make their best recommendation. And then I would prefer to do it that way and then have you reject it rather than giving me, I love your input, but I don't want to really go into it saying we're not going to touch teaching staff because there might be a reason why we want to touch that. And we might have a really good rationale. Some of the administrators, I think they've all been thinking about it. Some of them have approached me with a couple of ideas that I think it wouldn't negatively impact our students. And in times like this, I think everything should be on the table And I want it to be a really open brainstorm and listen to their rationale, because there may be other ways for us to cover something rather than to say, okay, we can't touch this, because ultimately you're going to have the final word. And if we come to you and say, hey, we think we can cut this teacher because of this, and you're like, no, we don't want you to, well, then that's going to be taken off the table. But I think that would be a better way for me to be able to go into it with my team to say, let's hear what you have to think and why. And, you know, there might be a teaching staff on there and they may have a really good reason why that is. So I just rather leave it open-ended, but have the number that you're looking for a little bit firm, like, you know, how low do you want to go with the tax impact? You know, is that 0? And is it 0 across all 3 towns, or we want you to cut another, you know, 500,000 or whatever? But I just would like to have the opportunity to have a really good, thoughtful brainstorming where everything can be put on the table. And then, of course, you can always reject our ideas, and we don't take that personally. We know that the ultimate decision is yours, and we respect that.
I just want to put out there that, you know, at the end of the day, the ultimate decision is with the taxpayers, right? I mean, they're the ones.
That's good. Yes.
Our budget, right? So we
yes.
try to put something that we think meets the needs and can be approved by the taxpayers. So I guess I'm just happy to hear you say that everything is on the table. You know, Kate said that, you know, opening the contract is the easy thing. I know she didn't mean it's easy to discuss that with the staff. It was just, you know, the biggest chunk of money is our wages, and contractual wages. So, you know, I know it's not easy, but I am glad to hear you say that everything is on the table, because that may be where we at least we need to have the conversation. So, Maddie.
Yeah, I agree that everything should be on the table for the purposes of brainstorming. And I just wanted to say that with regard to staff, I would be reluctant to do either, of course, but I would be more willing to ask staff to hold their salaries where they are than cut positions. And I think it's not a fun negotiation at all, but I think that it'd be not easier, but more willing negotiation on the other side if we were trying to just keep people employed and hold salaries where we can, than cut people in uncertain economic times.
Thank you, Maddie. Jen.
So I think that maybe, you know, from what Becky mentioned, you know, if there's a starting point to say, you know, we'd like to see what it looks like to get to no increase. I'm not a numbers person at all. So, I mean, that's a hard thing for me to even understand, like what that would look like. But, you know, if there was a way to start there and say, this is what it would look like if there was a, you know, like you had said, no tax increase across the 3 towns or something like that. And that was like the starting point. And then we could go up or down from there, depending on what we saw was on the table. Cause I think that's a big piece too, is, you know, of course, everyone would like to see no increase, but maybe there's a point that we would say, yeah, a little bit of an increase is okay, as long as we can keep these couple of things. So maybe that kind of no increase is the beginning, and then we can go up or down. And like I said, just again, not a numbers person, so I don't know if that's ridiculous. But that would at least give us somewhere to start.
So in anticipation of this discussion, I did run what it would take to get to.
Of course you did.
Of course I
you
did.
are a numbers person.
That's what I do. Across the 3 towns. Now, like you know, as you guys remember, looking at the budget, it varies town to town. But essentially, assuming that the assessments went back, so, you know, so that eliminates a little bit that we'd have to cut from our budgets. But assuming those assessments went back to all 3 towns, we would need to find an additional just shy of $1 million to get
Great.
no increase across the 3 towns. So, Valley.
Yeah, I think going to no increase is probably not realistic. No tax impact, and everything I say will be tax impact, not budget increase. Yeah, I mean, we do have increasing enrollments. We do have negotiated raises. I mean, we can ask for a voluntary drop in the increase in the wage, but I mean, I think asking for no increase may be, you know, just difficult. And we do have quite a few more students coming in. So I think if we can, personally, if we can keep the tax impact at 2 or lower for any of the 3 towns, I think that would be reasonable, given that their district is growing.
Kate.
So I'm looking at the regular instruction, Article 1. And we've got that article increasing about $1 million. And I know like most of it is the salary increase. I know there's some stuff in there, you know, new positions and stuff, but to get to where Michelle was talking, you could you could make a lot of headway there if we can get some sort of agreement with staff to maybe limit their increase. So obviously 0% increase would hold that increase from $1 million down to closer to 0. So, I mean, anywhere within that scale of maybe meeting in the middle or whatever on the wage increase, I support that. And I didn't mean to suggest earlier that it was easy. I know it's not. I was on the negotiations committee, but I just feel like you can do a lot of trying to pick and choose things out of the budget, and you're going to impact students by pulling things out and not get a lot of bang for your buck, I guess, in reducing, like getting towards your goal of reducing the tax impact.
Maddie.
I agree with what Valley said earlier about a moment ago about not going to no increase. And I'm not going to articulate this well, also not being a financial person, but I think we need to think big picture and long term as much as we possibly can. And we have no idea what the next couple of years are going to look like, from, you know, funding at the state level to the state of unemployment, what kind of a long-term recession or depression we might find ourselves in. And so I worry that if we bring it to no increase this year, then we'll be at such a deficit going forward, and maybe harder to ask for 1% or a 2% increase in the future when we are growing and we don't see economics necessarily impacting the number of families that we take care of.
Becky, can you remind me the enrollment increase expectation for next year?
I'm not sure I can. I think it was over. Oh, I don't think I can.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find it. If you give me a moment.
I've got all sorts of hands up, so I'll jump to them and you let me know.
Oh, maybe they know.
Oh, maybe they know. Jen.
Why do you have to ask her?
I just want to say, to what Valley and Maddie both said, I'm not stuck on the 0% at all. That was just what I threw out there as a baseline. So I understand, with both of what you said about possibly a 2% needing to be, where we look at. I definitely am not stuck there. So I don't want anyone to think that that's where I'm hard fast sitting.
Jeremy. I swear, Jeremy.
Yep, I had the hand. Just want to keep in mind that we just looked at that number of students not attending the RSU 5 schools that are in the district, and you got 396 for 2019. Yeah, got to wonder if incomes are down, and Lord knows they are. Will more people be not able to go to not choose to go to private schools and come back? Will that increase the numbers more too? So just want to keep that in mind. It's a possibility.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, Susannah, you're up next, but Becky has the number.
Yeah, we're increasing overall by 49 students. So we're at 2012 currently, and we're anticipating 2061. So pretty much a little over 2 classes.
Susannah.
Thank you. Just wanted to reiterate support for some of the ideas thrown out recently with the idea of going back, looking at numbered items and figuring out what number we feel is appropriate from the towns, and then working back on the budget and looking at those items and figure out what we need and what we don't. I also want to support, I believe Maddie initially raised the question of holding wages versus dropping positions. And that's something that I feel I'm much more comfortable asking people not to accept raises, not to take raises, than needing to cut positions. I think that cumulatively, for the most part, it has more of a detrimental impact both to the school district and town, but also to the individuals. But that said, looking into the future and not knowing, to what degree this period of economic uncertainty is going to develop into something greater, how long it's going to last, what the rebound is going to be, and if there are implications for holding salaries, not making the hires or the new positions this year, anything that we would be doing this year that would have implications financially later. So if that's, if we're delaying salary raises, are we promising them later? Are we putting ourselves in positions where we might have other financial issues? Are we, if we don't take, or if we cut people this year, are we, what is that going to do in a year or two? And obviously we don't know what that's going to do. So just want to, I guess, keep that in question. So I think that's it. So thank you. But I like that everything is still on the table. So
Jeremy.
Nope, didn't put my hand down from before. So.
Okay. Okay. So, what I'm hearing from
Kandi's got her hand up, I think.
Oh, does she? Oh, she's not even on my screen. Kandi. Where is she? You're muted, Kandi.
Yeah, she's been talking for a while.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
There you go.
Just wanted to say, kind of listening to all of this and having talked to Becky, I know she's looking for a percentage, a goal that the group would look to do. And I've basically heard 2 things out there, the 0 or the 2%. And I think it might be possible for the administrators and Becky and finances to look at what it would mean at 0% increase in the budget and what it would mean at 2% increase in the budget, so we could see those. And also, I know she mentioned, and from conversations with her, that they're working on where the savings are going to be this year, substitutes, gasoline for the buses, custodian, things like that. So we'd want to see that, and possibly what it would mean to have to look at 2% increase or 0% increase. Anyway.
Right. So remember, the ways that we can impact the tax, how we can control the tax impact are expenditures as well as revenue, right? And in terms of revenue, the unexpended fund balance is one source of revenue that we can use. I think we want to be really careful with our use of the unexpended fund balance right now, just given where we think things could go in the next year or two. Having a savings account to help offset shortfalls in state funding in future years could be really important to us not having to make hard decisions about programming and staff, to keep it at a reasonable budget. But those are the ways that we could look to manage that tax impact. And maybe it's a little bit of both, right? Maybe there's some expense savings that can be realized, and maybe we can offset some of it with savings from this year from the closure. So just want to throw that out there, that those are in the realm of everything's on the table. Those are all options. Valley.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to clarify. Sounds like Kandi didn't quite understand, or I wasn't clear enough. When I said 2%, and I think Jen and other people were talking about 0%, I think we were all talking about the impact to the taxpayer, not the budget increase.
Right. Yeah, because we had talked when Kandi and I had talked earlier. We had talked about use of fund balance, et cetera, and those are the things that impact the tax impact. Lindsay, you look surprised. Was your hand up?
It was up. I'm glad to know that everything is still on the table, and I think Dr. Foley has now heard from us, and I agree with her taking it back to her team. I would just point out, and I know that public school and education is not corporate, but there are some things where we can borrow, and I know many corporations right now are taking voluntary hits to salaries in a way so as to try and preserve the corporation, the entity, throughout the duration of this economic impact. And I think, many at the top are taking bigger hits, and those at the lower tier are taking a lesser hit. And again, I recognize that public school and education is not corporate America, but I think we work best when we borrow from one another. And I think a voluntary holding of wages would be an amazing message to send our communities. I think, Michelle, you just quoted, I know we're up to 26 million Americans, but I think you broke it down to us for Maine, 1 in 7. I mean, that is a very real scenario. And of course, no one wants to see people not have money that they've counted on. However, these are extraordinary circumstances, and we are going to have families on the brink. Anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. I'm done. I think that would be a really amazing way to say we are in this together. We are operating creatively as a community to try and preserve what is best for our students. Okay, over and out.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay. What? Oh, Jen Galetta. I don't know. I had to say your last name.
I do not disagree with anything that Lindsay said. I just want to make sure that everyone keeps in mind, I'm in a union, not a teachers union, and unions run very differently than corporate America. And I know that two things can happen. One is that, you know, for things to change in a union, you need to have the support of the people in the union, which could be possible. But there's also a real difficult time when you're in a union to make those types of huge sweeping changes that then can in the future become a precedent in some way, where there could be, you know, something that happens next year, and I'm not saying it's going to, I'm just saying way down the road, and then they say, well, you know, back in 2020, you know, everyone decided not to take a, you know, a pay cut. Let's look at that again. So I just think we just need to be careful, because and be mindful of the fact that we're going to be dealing with, if we go down that road, we're going to be dealing with two separate unions in addition to, you know, just keeping that in mind. There's the teachers and then the support staff as well. Contract. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to look to Becky to see if she feels like she has what she needs. I think the two numbers you heard are 0 and 2. I don't know if it's easier to pick one in the middle or having two options.
I think what we'll do, I froze up, so I heard that Lindsay had a rant. I didn't hear what it was, but you can fill me in later. That's when I came back in. But if you're saying that the recap is that you're hearing from 0 to 2, I think we can, you know, start at the 2 and then just show what it would look like all the way down to 0.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we are jumping back to policy now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I will throw it over to Cynthia.
And I would say that if Scott would like to leave, he can leave now. I don't think we'll need him for the rest of the budget meeting. I thought it was important for him to hear the budget discussion. And so, thank you, Scott.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Hi, Scott. All right, good evening. I'm first going to, I think we have, this one's first. Let me look at the agenda here. Okay, so our first one tonight is first read, and it's on the Board of Directors communication with staff. Very minor changes to this policy, and I'm not sure what, do you all have it in front of you? Okay. The first paragraph is just cleans it up a little bit. There's nothing that changes anything in the meaning. And then there were a couple of hers that we changed to either there or them. I did receive an email yesterday from Bali. She had a question about the last sentence. So if you want to go to the last paragraph, that's about the Board of Directors and teachers. And it says the relationship of the teacher and the Board of Directors is indirect. The teacher is directly responsible to the principal, and through them to the superintendent, and them to the Board of Directors. However, this does not mean that the teacher does not have access to the superintendent or to the board. Conditions may arise when direct access may be obtained through established communication channels. And so Vali's question was on that last sentence. Her question was, do we have a policy that clearly describes these conditions and how access is obtained in these situations? And so my response to that is there's no policy for that. There are a couple, I have a couple of examples when these conditions may apply. One is, the teachers are very familiar with the chain of command. And so they know that if they have an issue that they don't feel got resolved at the the first level of chain of command, they have the ability to have a union rep help them sort that through and go to the next level if need be. So that's one way. That's one way. And then another example of this is when you all or a lot of you participated at one or more of the board learnings that have happened across the district this year. So that was when you had access, you know, and the teachers had access to you, and you were able to interact with whatever the session was. So that is my response to that. So that's all that I have on that particular policy for first read. I don't know if you have a motion yet.
I don't believe I do. So I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the following policy first read, BHC, Board of Directors Communication with Staff. We can get the motion on the floor and then we'll do questions. Beth and Valley, is that a first and a second? Perfect. So motion is on the floor, and I see Susannah's hand up for a question.
I'm fine.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? All right, then we will do a roll call vote. Kate?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Kandi?
Yes.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Susannah?
Yes.
Yes.
Maura?
Yes.
I vote yes. Valley?
Yes.
Maddie?
Yes.
Liam?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. I just have to flip back because I was doing the writing down of the vote, so bear with me for a second. Okay, so then for second read, we have the bullying policy. And then, Bali had a couple of questions on that one. Bali fixed the error. There was an R that should have been an is, so I've already just taken care of that. And then Vali's question was on page 3. She was asking if all staff were trained in the bullying prevention and response. And I knew that they were, but I reached out to every principal and they responded that in regards to the training, all principals are very proactive and review bullying with staff at the beginning of each year. And they also talk about practice strategies to use to help prevent bullying. So that's the response to that. Any other questions on that one?
Is that part of orientation for new employees as well? Because I know obviously we get people throughout the year that come in.
It's not one of the target. Yeah, it is. It's in the handbook. I'm trying to remember if it's one of the target solution policies that they read. And I don't know. Maybe one of the principals can say if they do it during one of the first 2 days or at a staff meeting, or I don't know if somebody wants to just jump in and respond to that.
Well, I can speak for Durham, and I think most of us, it's a couple of things that you're putting in there. One is, we would train staff and explain to them reporting relative to the bullying process. The actual investigation is handled not by all staff. There's a protocol for that. But then all the preventive work, that happens throughout the year. But the introductory piece will often be referred to at the beginning of the year. But when we do have new people, we do refer them to the teacher handbook as well, or anything that's pertinent for them to know.
Thanks.
I'll move on. Are we going to do all these together, right? As a second reading?
We can. Do you want questions to wait to the end?
No, go ahead. I didn't know if we had any more on that.
Kate has her hand up. So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, I don't want to get into a grammar fight, but I think that under bullying prohibited, actually they both should be is.
Yes, that's the error. That was the error that I'm fixing.
Okay, I thought you were changing is to are. Okay.
No, are to is.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that is the error that we're fixing.
Okay.
Jen is not a number person. I'm not a grammar person. All right, carry on, Cynthia.
Okay, so the next one goes with it is the bullying administrative procedure, JICKR. So on this one, let's see, we had, okay, trying to remember from the last, I think there was a place where we added a definition. But I think we did that the first time. Okay, so on this one, I have also some questions from Bali. On page 1, in that second paragraph, she was asking that we add, it's referring to the sexual harassment, sexual harassment procedure, ACAA-R. And she's asking that we have, let's see, she wants us to add gender identity or expression to paragraph 2, because if you look at the beginning, it says bullying behavior alleged to be based on race, color, ancestry, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, religion, and disability. And so she was asking that we add gender identity or expression to paragraph 2. We can do that. It's not in ACAAR, but my suggestion would be if we do add that, and it makes sense to do that, we would just go ahead as the policy committee and make that change in the ACAAR in that one section. So then on page, I don't know if any questions on that one, on page 4. Under response to bullying, right in the center of the page. Vali had asked that where it says a letter A, but I'm going to take you to the paragraph that's underlined above it because it's going to make more sense. In order to remediate any substantiated incident of bullying, to counter the negative impact of the bullying and reduce the risk of future bullying incidents, the principal may consider the following alternatives, which include but are not limited to. So on letter A, it currently says meeting with the student and the student's parents. She had 2 suggestions. One was to put parents or guardians, which told in the rest of the body, whenever parents is mentioned, I think it does have guardians. So I'm going to suggest that we do that. Her other suggestion, though, was to put and or, meeting with the student and or the student's parents. We always meet with the student, and we always attempt to meet with the parents. So I'm not sure or would make sense there. And then the last suggestion was in the same section. If you just turn the page, and it fits under that, all those alternatives. One of the things that she suggested is at the end, actually after J, is to add a K. And the recommendation was to add accommodations to keep perpetrator and target apart whenever necessary / possible. For example, assigning seats on buses and so forth. I had my initial reaction was, well, I had an initial reaction, and so then I reached out to all of the principals who actually are using this on a daily basis, right? So I asked them what their input was, and
there's no volume unless I have this plugged in.
You unplug that, right?
Yeah, there's no volume. Oh, wait a minute, we're having issues.
Okay, I'll pause.
Oh, can you? Okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll just leave that off for now. Sorry, guys, my computer crashed on me.
Okay.
They just tried to get me.
Susannah,
move the chair out from behind me. Go ahead.
Okay, so the suggested language was not supported by any of the building principals, and they're the ones that are using the policy on a regular basis. I did hear back from all of them. And additionally, I just want to point out it's really not needed, because I'm going to take you to another place. If you look on page 5, which you should be there right now. If we go to the sentence that starts, if bullying has been substantiated, I just want to make sure you're all there. So it's a couple lines underneath the J. It says the building principal will provide written notification to the parents and the guardian of the targeted student, including the measures being taken to ensure the student's safety. So, as I've talked with the principals over the years, and they're talking about what they're doing, if they need to do those things, they do those things, so they're already taking any measure that's necessary, and every situation is very different. And so it may or may not make sense. So I feel like it's covered there. So that's all I have on that particular policy.
Okay, it looks like we have some questions. Susannah?
Yeah, my question actually was on the first part of that, although Vali's point to section A, being with the student and or student parents, so I had also wondered about adding guardians there. But more substantially, in the opening part of that, the bullying and administrative procedure, the second paragraph where we added about gender, Vali's comment about gender identity. Mm-hmm. Is it possible, and I don't know with the ACAR criteria, to have something saying that bullying behavior alleged to be based on race, color, ancestry, etc., but to say that that's not an exclusive list? Because there's certainly other things that bullying can be based upon that becomes problematic in school that's not included there. And I don't want to get into a situation where we're trying to come up with absolutely everything we can think of, because it's not going to be exhaustive. And
so these are really in law, right? So
yeah, and that's what I'm wondering, if there's what the flexibility is there.
Yeah, these are really in law. We have other policies that are connected with behavior anyway, but these I wouldn't stray too much from that. I remember last year we talked about the gender identity and opted not to put it in because it wasn't actually in that definition. I would suggest sticking to these.
So do we have something that says acknowledges bullying based on other criteria of identity?
So we have sexual harassment policies. We've got, there are other policies. I mean, I guess I need to know what specifically you might be talking about.
Okay. It's just that that's not an exhaustive list of ways in which bullying can happen. So I just want to make sure that without getting repetitive, that things are covered. That's all. If it's done through other policy, that's fine. So that's it.
Okay.
Beth.
Hi. So in the first bullying policy, JICK, it does define gender identity, and it is included in all of the other definitions, like the legal definitions. So that would be my only question is, do we want to be consistent and add it to that paragraph as well, as Vali suggested, because it is in the language in every other part that talks about that. And then on a non-content, just a little bit of a grammar thing, under it's page 4 of 5 for JICK-R. At the top, interim measures. I just noticed in a lot of other places you've taken out the he/she and added a they. So
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Even though you think you've gotten them all, you can read it.
Oh, I know. I know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If they deem. Okay.
Kate.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what people are asking about in regards to the gender identity question or gender identity or expression. You're asking for it to be added to the paragraph in the procedure. Is that what we're saying, Cynthia? Okay.
Yes, the second paragraph that starts with bullying behavior alleged based on.
Yes, okay. So the second paragraph is specific to student harassment and sexual harassment. That is defined by law. Bullying policy covers gender identity and expression. The purpose of that second paragraph is to say that the bullying behavior is based on any of those things. You also need to look at the other. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So we can't list in that paragraph anything that's not covered by law by the sexual harassment policy. So I guess we've captured gender identity in the bullying policy.
Right. That makes sense.
Golly.
Yeah, so you don't want to have the same language in the bullying policy and then the supporting document, the report, or whatever, the administrative procedure. Can you hear me?
On to that.
I think what she was saying though is it can be covered by the bullying policy, but the procedure is if it's based on certain criteria, it also has to run through a different procedure as defined by law.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine if you don't want to add it, but it seems logical that we would use the same language in the policy and the procedure. Because someone might just read the procedure and not the policy. I think it's just a question of being consistent. I mean, I'm not going to push when it's totally fine either way. Okay. I'm glad to hear that accommodations are made, even though it's not in the policy. I just want to make sure that that happens.
Yep.
Yeah, because the list was very exhaustive of what kind of justice it's handed to the perpetrator, but there wasn't anything describing what's being done to address the needs of the target. Yeah, but if the principals are doing that, then that's all that needs to happen. And I'm glad that it's happening right now.
Thank you, Vi. And the last one, I think.
Oh no, we've got more questions.
Sorry.
Sorry. Kate.
Thank you.
Did you put your hand down?
I was going to, I think that there may just be a misunderstanding in the purpose of that second paragraph on the procedure. She's shaking her head. I don't know how to explain it because we're talking through a computer. So the reason that paragraph is not in the policy on bullying is because when you go to implement the procedure for bullying, if the bullying falls into those specific categories, you have to use the other procedure, not the bullying procedure. Or they go together. I'm not quite sure. They might go together, but you have to make sure for those specific instances of race, color, ancestry, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, religion, or disability, you go to the sexual harassment procedure.
Maura.
I was just going to put my hand down because I was going to say something similar, but I remember looking at those two laws and seeing that overlap, and that's like the one area.
Yes.
I think gender identity and expression is not included in the sexual harassment law or something like that.
Okay. Correct.
Okay, now you're good, Cynthia.
Okay. So the last policy, I think that there might be some board discussion on, but I'm going to try to get us focused on the area. So the only requested change from the first read to the second read was for us to come back and look at, this is the approval of new athletic programs, to look at the section on page 2, section B. And we had a lot of discussion around co-ops, the MPA co-ops. And so the policy committee made some changes, and Molly had a couple of suggestions. And so I'm going to put them out and let the board discuss it, because I don't really have an opinion on this one. So Molly's suggestions were let me get to the page here. So we're on page 2, section B, and you can see that we crossed off the first 4 paragraphs. And so Volley's suggestion was to keep paragraphs 3 and 4, which start with the word following. And then I'm going to put that to the board to see what they want to do. I'll give you the other couple of suggestions right now as well. In the last paragraph, that's all underlined. The suggestion was to where it says on the 3rd line down, where it starts with all new MPA cooperative teams. She would like to insert right there, or MPA cooperative teams up for renewal. And I think that was part of the discussion last time. So I wanted to give you that right now as well. And then Volley asked a question about why only during the budget development process prior to the proposed starting date. Then she mentioned the Alpine Ski Co-op team was approved in the fall. Would this tie the hands of the athletic director? So I did share this with the committee and Craig ahead of this meeting. I think Craig had said we could add maybe, or at such a date as required by the MPA approval process. So I gave you all of that information, and so I don't know if you want to take each piece, or maybe start with the 2 paragraphs, or maybe Kate wants to say why we got rid of that probationary period, or Maddie or Kandi.
Well, Kate's hand's already up, so we'll let her.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I put my hand up because I wanted to talk about the probationary period. So, we went back after the previous meeting where we talked about this, and it was our understanding that, we don't really use the probationary period and revisit athletic programs that way. And we felt that the evaluation of existing programs was covered by C pretty well, where we're expecting that we would review on an as-needed basis any program for whether or not it should continue. And that is as needed or when directed by the board. So we felt like, if there was an indication that we had a dwindling, football team or something like that, that on an as needed basis, that Craig would likely bring that to us, or the board could request that it be looked at, and that doing the 2-year probationary period, we haven't been doing it in practice. And so we felt this helped align the policy with how we currently do it.
Can I ask how that impacts the co-ops? Because I know those are really like re-upped every certain period. And I know Craig has his hand up, so maybe he can answer that question. Craig?
Right, so co-ops are a 2-year process. Every 2 years, we either apply to do a new co-op or to renew an existing one. And I think I'll add a little bit. So I think, in my 20 plus years here, I would have to agree, we have not used the probationary period. That has never been a topic of conversation that's not words that we've ever used. So I think to now all of a sudden do it, it's not our practice, it's not something that we've done. So I think to use the budget process, which is the way that we have used it, but I do think Valley's concern of co-ops, I think if we add a statement such as, or as such date required by the NPA approval process. So I think the concern here is the co-ops, either new co-ops or renewing co-ops. I think if we add that sentence or add it somewhere, that at such a date required by the NPA approval process, that would cover Valley's concerns. That may not be right. I'd like to hear from Valley, but I think I think that would cover it. The co-ops have to be applied for 3 months in advance of the regular season. So this next Alpine ski season, we would have to, the ski season begins in January, so we would have to opt in either September or October. And I would come before the board and just say we would like to renew our co-op agreement and move forward at that point.
Valerie.
That's a good solution. So I think the renewals of all these co-op teams.
Kate.
Okay, so for this paragraph, Valerie, you just cut in and out just a little bit, so I didn't catch exactly what you said. Were you saying something about the MPA cooperative teams up for renewal?
Yeah, so what I was saying is that what Craig suggested answers my concern about not remembering, because honestly, as a board, we don't know when we need to review these teams, and unless someone comes to us and say, hey, by the way, this is happening, we wouldn't think of asking for that. So what Craig is saying addresses that issue.
Oh, okay, I get it. So for the renewal stuff, do we need to add that if under C, every athletic program will be reviewed on an as-needed basis? If we have an as-needed basis, I interpret that to mean that Craig would determine if it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, that is correct, but it does, I think having a little redundancy there by adding the language that Craig just suggested would probably make it very clear.
And
so
also
would
it allows for
I would support what Craig suggested, basically.
Yeah, because C is only for existing, right? So if
Right.
you had a new co-op we had the opportunity that came to us in September.
Right, yeah, yes. No, I totally agree with adding that piece or at such date required by the MPA process, adding that to the last paragraph. I totally agree with that. I wasn't clear on the first comment from Valley of adding MPA cooperative teams up for renewal. If we needed to add that, if we add the sentence on the end of the paragraph.
Yeah, I don't believe you would need it then, because they need to be renewed by MPA rules every couple of years. So by adding what Craig suggested we add, then we don't have to include that other suggestion of when they come up for renewal, because that would happen.
Okay. So I guess my question is that's our last one, right, Cynthia?
Yes, it is. I was muted, sorry.
That's okay. So Any other comments or questions on the second read with the adjustment to that B there, with essentially the elimination of the probationary period that we weren't doing anyway? Okay, so I will take that as everyone is comfortable with the policies, the second read policies as we've gone through them with the changes noted. And so I would take a motion for consideration and approval for the following policies second read: JICK, JICKR, and JJIB. Susannah and Beth, thank you. All right, we will go through the roll. Kate.
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Kandi.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes.
Susannah.
Yes.
Beth.
Yes.
Mara.
Yes.
I vote yes. Vali.
Yes.
Maddie.
Yes.
And Liam.
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. We've already, so now we will, what are we moving on to? No, remote learning, right? 12B, update on remote learning.
Okay. I'm going to start us off. Today we began our 6th week of remote learning, beginning on March 18th. Our first 2 weeks primarily focused on ensuring that all students were fed, and we worked to ensure that all students had access to the internet and had a device. And then during that time, we also used, the teachers provided a review of the content that had already been taught as a review. And then by the 3rd week, we shifted to new learning. At the elementary level, for example, we added 2 morning meetings a week. And I was so pleased to hear Liam start off today with saying that he felt the remote learning was going well for him. So that's great news. I'm going to turn it over to a couple of the principals. Will Pidden is going to talk about the K through 8. And then Jen's going to continue by talking about how it's going at the high school. So Will?
Okay, thanks, Cynthia. We got just sort of a couple of pieces to update. Firstly, in terms of adding on to Cynthia's update, pre-K 5, the work so far, I mean, I guess I would start by saying pre-K 8, we've been really happy about the level of engagement that students have returned from break with. Teachers and learners all seem happy to reconnect these first few days this week, which has been really encouraging. And I think it was a little bit of a sense of the unknown, but everyone seemed happy to reconnect. For pre-K 5, the kind of curriculum pieces, literacy and math strategists have been doing a great job of prioritizing and compacting the curriculum for the remainder of the year. These plans have been rolled out to staff this week. They're already planned through this week, but this is moving forward from next week. And we anticipate there may be an additional book distribution for students in the elementary grades next week, so that will be communicated by individual schools. In addition, the strategists are helping to develop some resources for parents with ways to support their children at home with math and reading and writing. This was a need that was identified from feedback that was gathered from families prior to the break. And all the schools are continuing to reach out and support families and students with academic, social, emotional needs, as well as resources if they're still unrolling different technology needs or book needs or accommodations for a little less work or a little more work. Those are becoming more refined as we go along. So those are sort of some of the broad curriculum updates. One of the pieces we want to share is sort of grading and also end of year. So for the end of the year, what we're looking at pre-K 5 is that the content for remote learning will continue right up to the week of June 8th. And then the week of June 8th is going to be, we're sort of referring to it at this point in time as specials week, but Our specials teachers are going to be developing specific sort of curriculum for children that will be hopefully engaging and sort of signify this sort of starting to wind down the school year as it would traditionally. Some of the themes they're looking at around nature or summer in Maine, those are being developed right now by the specials teams. And I will say to you that we are sensitive to the fact that we also have heard that for parents, we need to be assured that that doesn't mean that, like, okay, now you have to go off and do all these like extensive projects with them. We're trying to make sure that this is manageable, respective to the age and agency of the children. That feeds into how we're wrapping up pre-K5 with grading. For the children pre-K5, there won't be a sort of 1 through 4 grade for their reporting for this third trimester. Our work in our elementary levels is very much based on summative assessments from, for example, you'll know from reading with the Fountas and Pinnell assessments that we really can't administer in this remote context. So the teachers are doing very much observational work with conferring with children, as well as work that is being submitted. And they will be doing a narrative report for this third trimester over what could become kind of somewhat subjective 1 through 4. So what will happen is during the specials week, children won't have curriculum content from their teachers. That will be a time when the teachers are writing these narratives and putting thought into how they will wrap up the school year with connecting with families and children that following week, that last week of school. We're also looking respectively at the different schools about what will a remote step-up day look like, how will we wrap up the year so children have a sense of excitement moving forward for the following year, as well as some closure to this year. So that is the pre-K5. The 6-8 is really very similar in some regards. The similar in regards to certainly the way the children or the students have returned to school this week, first week back. Very positive reconnection with the learning, high levels of engagement, teachers happy to reconnect with students again. We in the middle school levels, we're continuing to with the consistent outreach to students and family to try and meet them where they are. Feedback we received specifically for some of this grade level is that where the more that teachers are quote unquote in front of the students, the better, whether that be in videoed lessons, instruction, or with office hours and tutoring, that really seems to resonate a lot with our early adolescent learners. That with that in mind, teaching teams sort of continue to sort of refine how they can, individuals or teams, and how they can try to meet that need. The teaching teams are continuing to refine their curriculums based on prioritizing the key learnings that would usually be addressed this time of year, whilst also maintaining engagement as remote learning continues on into summertime here. So it does involve sort of compacting and prioritizing. The teaching teams have done a good job with that. And with that in mind, across pre-K through 8, Cynthia has been working with our strategists and starting to look at what will be the impact for next year based on the compacting of curriculum this spring. What will be things that have been either compacted to an extent or not taught to an extent, and what will be the impact of that in the fall, so that we can be planned ahead, so that when we do start back up in the school year, we'll have a good sense of what we need to do to make sure we catch kids up next year. In regards to grading and end of year for 6-8, we are also looking at some changing up for the last couple of weeks of school. Those plans are sort of being developed. They'll be a little different between the schools based on some of the offerings or staff expertise, but we're looking at creating a break from the traditional curriculum with some more engaging project to wrap up the year. Their report cards will be along the lines of what they're usually receiving. They are receiving grades right now in the middle school grade levels. one of the things that has been very important across all grade levels has been that no harm can be done as a result of student participating in remote learning. You cannot anticipate exactly what each child or family is having to navigate or wrestle. And so we can't have a situation where a student is being judged or assessed in a circumstance that they have no control over. So whilst we are giving them feedback, there's some latitude, and for students who are struggling to meet standards, the lowest score they're receiving is an incomplete, and then staff are working with students or families to figure out how to address that and how to support them in bridging that up or scaffolding that up to a more successful outcome. So the other part of that with middle school grading is that across the middle schools, we had adapted the habits of work rubrics that we traditionally use to be more reflective of remote learning. And so they are getting feedback on sort of remote learning habits of work also. So that's sort of a compacted update across the levels of pre-K8. And then I think Jen has got high school.
Hi, everybody. So just to share an update of what's been happening with our planning at the high school. First, to start with grading, as I've shared with the board, I've done a lot of talking with the other Cumberland principals. We did lots of brainstorming about what we thought was fair and right, you know, piggybacking on what Will just said about do no harm, knowing that there's absolutely no way for us to know or be able to predict who is struggling right now. We, after lots of discussion with, I've been working with our leadership team and our department chair team at the high school, we decided that we're going to continue with our numeric grading as is, our 0 to 100 grading. And then at the end of the semester, at the end of the school year, students are going to be able to choose whether they keep that numeric grade, which would then factor into their overall GPA, or they'll be able to choose whether they'll take a pass-fail grade, and the pass-fail grade would not go into their GPA. We felt that leaving that decision up to students and families will help to address their individual needs and situations. We are, again, like Will commented, we are not, there's no entering of any zeros at the high school for any grades for work that's not turned in. And so teachers are either using the code of missing or incomplete. And knowing that some students are going to need more time to make up that incomplete. So that being said, that factored into our decision about how we end the year, because what we were trying to do was make sure that we had meaningful learning opportunities for all kids while we were still offering some extensive support for the kids that need it. This is another topic that all of the principals, high school principals in Cumberland have been talking about. How do we make sure, you know, we're not doing any harm with grading by assigning incompletes, but also making sure that we don't end up with an exorbitant number of students who have incompletes going into the summer and who need more tailored support. So starting on June 1st, if a student is totally caught up in all of their work, then they are going to have the opportunity, Liam touched on this a little bit, to participate in an exploration project. The leadership teams right now are working on the details of that. We are very lucky that we already have our senior project as a longstanding part of our school. And so we're looking at the explorations as almost being a mini version of a senior project, that it's either an individual project or a group project. But it's tied to students exploring some kind of new information or skill that will be led by an advisor that's one of our faculty members. And they're able to engage in that project and then present to some staff members and students their learning by the end of the year. students who have an incomplete and who are in need of more support are also going to have the opportunity to do an exploration, but we are going to require that they prioritize the work in their academic classes that they've been working on for the full year. So some students will be able to handle doing both, working on their incompletes and getting more support from teachers while still participating in an exploration. And I would anticipate that others are just going to focus on their academic work and forgo the exploration project. So in talking to the limited number of kids that I see that come to the high school to pick things up or have been emailing with it, I think that some of our students are really looking forward to this. Just about all of our students are familiar with our senior project process in some way, shape, or form. And so some of that is going to be modeled after that, where they'll be working on daily reflections, checking in with advisors. And so that will hopefully help us really understand who is going to be in need of summer school and who just needed a little bit more time and a little bit more individualized support in those weeks in June. With the governor's announcement yesterday, we are hopeful that we can bring students physically into the building this summer in some way, shape, or form to do summer school. Since that news is only 24 hours old, we don't have a format of what that will look like, but I feel very hopeful that we'll be able to get some targeted support for students over the summer. And then the last thing that we are working on right now that I know the board has asked about is how we are addressing live weekly contact with all of our students, because that has certainly been a challenge for us. One of the things that we've been able to do is pull all of the data for all of our students and for our teacher of who has been connected on a Google Meet so far. Our tech department is outstanding and has been able to pull together that data, and we're just looking at it right now, and we can definitely see that there's kind of a couple different, since I often talk in buckets, there's kind of different buckets that kids fall into. Some of our students have had extensive opportunities for live virtual contact with teachers. Some students have had these opportunities and are not taking them for a variety of reasons. And then some students have not had many or any opportunities to check in and meet live virtually with teachers. And so we know that with us not returning to school, that this is critical that we make sure that there's weekly contact offered for all students. And so the leadership teams are working on that right now of what that can look like for us. I think it will continue to be a challenge for us that some students are not taking that opportunity. I will say that our main office staff and Charlie Mellon have done an outstanding job with attendance. They have been relentless in attendance. And so every single student is accounted for every single day by phone call or checking in some way with one of the office staff. And so the leadership team is working on this right now to figure out what is the best way that we can have live contact with students and make sure that all of our students have that connection. I think that's it.
Great.
Oh, graduation. I didn't say that. Right. End of the year event. Nobody's wondering about graduation. We are, in terms of all of our events, I think it's important that we recognize the value of the celebrations that we have throughout the year for all of the grades, not just for the seniors, for things like academic awards and sports awards. So we are really trying to think of some ways to do that more than just emailing kids and posting lists of names. We want to make sure that we try to do that more personally. Things like one of our biggest meetings in the spring has been the meetings for 8th grade parents and students who are our incoming ninth graders. Our plan is to do that meeting virtually so that parents and students still have the opportunity to hear some of that information, hear from some of our older students, and ask any questions that they might have. So that's something that we're definitely planning to do in May. And then the graduation and the senior events continue to be a challenge for us. Our plans that we had talked about, tentative plans, as Dr. Foley said in August, the way that we had hoped are not going to be able to continue. But I'm meeting with the senior class officers and the advisors. We actually have a meeting tomorrow. So we're going to continue to talk about what it is that the kids really feel will be the best way to celebrate their class and their achievement. And parents have been wonderful about emailing me ideas, especially ones they see on social media and things that other schools are doing. So we're considering all of those options, but we definitely want the students to have a voice in this. And they've spent the last 2 weeks getting feedback from other members of the class of 2020. What's difficult is now the governor's announcement probably changed some of the ideas that they had as of yesterday. So the plan is to meet with the kids tomorrow and then email all of the parents and families and students of the senior class to just say where we stand in our planning. And I am definitely confident that we can figure out ways to celebrate them, but it's going to take some creative thinking.
Thank you. Valerie.
Thank you both for those very, very good updates. I really appreciate the fact that everyone in administration is taking very seriously the issue of connecting with students. That's one that is really high on the priority list for most people in the community, parents and students included. So any effort that you guys can continue to do to create a virtual community where students and teachers can see each other and their peers on a regular basis is super important. So thank you for focusing energy on that. And I have to just say a lot of really nice things about the morning meetings and the conferring at the lower grades. They've been tremendously helpful in uplifting the kids who are younger and really need to see the face of the teacher and their peers on the screen as much as possible. So thank you for doing that and keep up that great work. Yeah, I had a question about the exploration projects. Is there any financial assistance for kids who needed to complete a project that may require materials, or what kind of support are we offering in addition to the mentoring? Because I know that some of these projects can get a little expensive, and I'm not sure all the families can afford to buy the materials, if they can even get them at this point with everything being closed.
Oh, sorry.
Go. Who was that?
That was Jen.
Oh, go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
So right now, I know that sometimes for the going by the senior projects, sometimes kids come up with a project that, the kids who wanted to revamp the Peace Garden last year, part of their project was fundraising for that and then doing the project. We are shying away from those. We're making a menu of options. It's not for the senior projects, it's really completely open. We give them some ideas, but really it's up to the seniors that they have to generate this idea and come up with all of the details. We know that for the younger grades, 9 through 11, they're going to need more guidance in choosing a project. And so we've already been working on this list of ideas that, as of right now, they're not necessarily projects that would entail a financial impact. A parent emailed me today and said, how much parent guidance would it need? That's not how we're designing the projects for the high schoolers. And they're going to be very, very different. So we're going to offer things from academic research projects to something that's connected to community service, something that's connected to social justice, And so we don't have a plan to support them financially, because I don't think that that's going to be the majority of the type of projects that we would offer. If a student comes up with their own idea to build a garden or something like that, then I think that we would advise them that they would likely have to come up with those materials. And if that's not possible, then coach them on choosing a different project.
Or I would say that there would be funds available, right? Just like when we ask at the beginning of the year for supplies, it's really a donation, and we always expect and we always help students that can't bring in those supplies, or we try to give it to. So it's available. We know there's money there from the savings that we've had for this year, so there's definitely money in the budget for any family currently during this pandemic that maybe, can't buy the supplies for whatever the project may be. So we can make sure that as we enter that more student-based kind of project-based phase in June, that we communicate that if there's any kind of hardship, that there are funds available.
Okay, thank you. All right, so new business 13. This is a motion, a vote that we take every year. This is what allows the Finance Committee at the end of the year to transfer between articles not to exceed 5% of any cost center. It just it's just a procedural vote that we do every spring that basically allows the at the last finance meeting at the end of June to clean up any inter article transfers that need to be made. So I would take a motion for consideration of action that, pursuant to section 14854 of the Title 20A, that the Finance Committee be authorized to transfer not more than 5% of the total appropriation for any cost center in the FY21 operating budget to another cost center, or should this be the FY20?
No, it's the next one. You do it for the next year in June. You ask this question every year.
I do?
Yes.
Apparently I ask this question every year.
I think you do.
But I still think it should be this year. Okay,
No,
anyway.
you already did for FY20.
We did it last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do it for the upcoming year. Okay. We're so ahead of the game. 5% of the total appropriation for any cost center in the FY21 operating budget to another cost center or among other cost centers, provided that the total FY21 fiscal year operating budget shall not be increased by such transfers. Sorry for this small delay in the middle of the reading. Vali, and second.
Maddie and Mara have that hand up.
Okay, so Maddie, I saw you had your hand up. We're going to take that as a second, but we'll ask if folks have questions. I think all the hands went down, so hopefully those were for motions. Okay, so we have a motion and a second, so we will do a roll call vote. Kate?
Yes.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Kandi?
Yes.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Susannah?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Mara?
Yes.
I vote yes. Vali?
Yes.
Maddie?
Yes.
And Liam?
Yes.
Great, thank you. It's funny the things I can retain in my brain, but I can apparently not remember this vote every year. Kate, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just checking the minutes from this meeting last year, and we did approve FY20 last year.
I don't know why I ever questioned Ginny. Okay, good. So, so good. We're good with that. We don't have any personnel issues. So we are back to the second public comment period of the agenda. So if you had a question or a comment, or not a question, but a comment for the board, now would be your opportunity to do that. We just ask that you raise your hand and let us know your name, where you're from, and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Hello.
Hi, Ralph.
Yeah, hi. My name's Ralph Dean. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Okay, you can be grateful for the fact that my camera is broken and you can't see me. Even before the budget came out, draft came out, I was concerned about it. But given everything that's happened since then, I think it's now critical for people to speak up. I don't know of anybody who in Pownell, Freeport, or Durham will not see their income, their net worth, or their property value go down this year, next year, possibly the year after. Given that, I think it's important that the RSU consider not just holding spending level, but looking at wherever savings it can find, given reduced spending this year, as has been discussed. I heard discussion about the state, concerns about lowered funding from them in the out years. I can guarantee you that the taxpayers will be further burdened by rising taxes from the state to make up from their shortfalls, which cannot be made up by property taxes or held level by property taxes, as can those by the RSU and the municipality. Taxes will go up on the residents from the state, further burdening them. I heard talk about nutrition programs. Okay, great. Nobody's talking about cutting those. Nobody's talking about cutting essential education. It was nice to hear Dr. Foyles talk about maybe holding salaries level. That would be nice. I would ask her to remember that the public will not be deaf to insensitivity about their pain when the union employees have a guaranteed employment, when many of our residents are going to be on the street. And that's something for them to keep in mind. I heard one of the members say that a 2.8% increase in taxes would be negligible. It's not negligible if you got to pay it. It's not negligible if you don't have a job. Think about that. Finally, I'd like to make 2 points. Number one is that I'd like to know a timeline and a process for development of the new budget draft, since it's clear that the board needs to go back to white paper here and figure something out. I'd like to know what that process is and what the timeline is. And as a final comment, having sat here for 2.5 hours listening to internal discussions about everything from athletics to you know what, it might be advisable to permit public process agenda item by agenda item rather than at the end of the meeting, if these meetings are going to be held online and ad hoc like this. So in any event, those are my comments. I speak for the quiet few who don't have much of a voice, but who spend a lot of money in this town and have investment in our neighbors who are suffering. And I ask you to think about them. Thank you.
Ralph, would you mind letting us know where you live?
125 Dune Drive, Freeport.
In Freeport, okay. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Ralph, sorry. Your name popped up here. I don't see any other hands up for public comment. All right, so now I would take a motion for consideration and approval to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA section 40560 for the purpose of discussing support staff negotiations for RSU 5. Maddie and Susannah, thank you. So we will do a quick vote.
And before you do that, could I just let the administrators leave for this evening and thank them for their participation, and we'll start our budget discussions on Friday. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Kate.
Yes.
Jeremy.
Yes.
Kandi.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Jen. I said Jen.
Yes, yes, sorry. My family's
I'm like, you're looking at me like you're going to say something.
I know.
Susannah.
Yes.
Beth.
Yes.
Mara.
Yes.
I vote yes. Vali.
Yeah.
Maddie.
Yes.
And Liam. Okay, so Liam hopped off. All right, so thank you. So we'll take a quick break to clear the lines to just remain the board members for executive session, and we'll be back in just a sec.
Jeannie, how do you do this? Can you limit who's here?